We're going to talk a little basketball at some point, but we've talked a lot of basketball today. I want to get into some football. David Teel, who is a columnist who has written for papers in Virginia covering the Atlantic Coast Conference for well over 10 years. I'm not going to date him, but it's about 3 decades covering the Atlantic Coast Conference. There are 0 people who have done it better. None. And I appreciate David Teel's time, and I know you're back home, Virginian Pilot, and the Daily Press in Newport News, so congratulations on that.
Thanks, brother.
I talked to Wes Durham yesterday. We all know who Wes is, the reason the league makes a profit as the lead voice of the ACC network. And I asked him if SMU were to lose to Clemson, will they stay in the college football playoff field? And he said, I'd like to think so. And the answer really should be, of course, except that there's no possible way we could be confident of that based on the narrative, like based on the fact that Miami at 10-2, who has 2 acceptable losses, is behind Indiana and Penn State that have no good wins. I'm sorry, I don't buy any of those 2 teams' wins. I don't think any of them are good. Certainly not as good as some of Miami's wins, regardless. Are you confident that SMU will be in the field if they lose to Clemson?
Absolutely not. I mean, Adam, this is a sequel.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's last year. It's Tuesday night. I mean, how many times do we have to see it?
Yeah.
It's Alabama and the SEC. The committee is clearly benevolent to them and their wishes. And it doesn't really matter what the other arguments are. In my mind, going to Oklahoma, which at the time was 1-5 in the SEC,
right,
and a week later would get boat raced by LSU. When you go to Oklahoma and you score 3 points and lose by 3 touchdowns, I think that is a playoff disqualifier. End of story.
All right, so here's where I depart from the national pushback on what the committee is doing. And
Okay.
and you're right about Alabama. That should have been a disqualifying loss. But I do think, and I've always thought, that your wins are more important than your losses. Not that losses don't matter. And Alabama's wins trump the losses. And they are the last team in. And theoretically, if SMU doesn't fall out of the field, Alabama does, right? So if Clemson wins and SMU, and they should, based on Greg Sankey's own comments, that it shouldn't be a negative if you lose your conference championship game. It should be a bonus. Of course, he was not saying that with SMU in mind. He was saying that with Georgia in mind, and Georgia nearly put themselves in position where they had to win that just to have a chance. Gosh, George, Brent Key should have gone for 2 in the first overtime. But so my problem is not with the SEC, because I do believe that they play, by and large, the best football. I think they have the best teams. They have the best players. The NFL draft tells us this just about every year. My problem is really with the Big Ten, in that I want somebody to show me the credentials of Indiana and Penn State. Who have they beaten? And I think you could probably make the same argument about Notre Dame, who has no good wins. Texas A&M is their best win, which, by the way, is better than any win on Penn State's schedule or Indiana's schedule. So I don't get. Indiana didn't even try outside the league. They didn't play anybody even remotely competent outside the Big Ten. So I don't understand why those teams are getting the benefit of the doubt when teams in the ACC are not.
Adam, you make I especially buy your point about the Hoosiers And look, I know Kurt Signetti,
Yeah.
and admire what he did at my alma mater, but they purposely avoided any good non-conference opponents. They canceled a game against Louisville to schedule Western Illinois because they thought they were going to be terrible.
Right.
And lo and behold, Kurt Signetti comes in and brings 13 JMU dudes with him who were really good players for the Dukes, and they translated to the Big Ten. Now, hey, he did something that Ohio State couldn't do, and that was beat Michigan.
That's right. Yeah.
But, however, when he played the Buckeyes, it didn't go so well.
Right.
And so yes, Indiana's lack of quality victories to me resonate more Penn State's dearth of those elite top shelf wins, just because I saw Penn State play Ohio State. Granted, it was at home.
Yeah.
But that was a really competitive. Penn State looked like it belonged.
Right.
Indiana did not look like it belonged when it played Ohio State.
Yeah, that's the other thing about it. Indiana's got this great offense, and I'm not knocking it. That's what the numbers say, and they hung 66 on Purdue last week. In the game against Ohio State, who I think kind of proved to be good but not great, especially when you look at how they lost to Michigan at home. The Hoosiers put up 70 yards of offense in their first drive, and when the game was decided, 75 yards of offense in their last drive, and gained 6 yards in between. Right. So I just don't know how we're like, yes, you have a great offense that clearly works against bad teams, and that's great. None of those teams will be in the college football playoff. Part of me, and I don't want to root for blowouts, because I think the college football playoff should be about fun games and all that. There's no other reason to expand it other than to have good football games. But part of me wants to see Indiana, Penn State, and to a certain extent Ohio State get absolutely smoked to prove a point. It's sort of like when we, as basketball fans, we argue, why does the Big Ten or the Big 12, why don't they get all these teams in? The ACC gets half the amount, and we're playing in the Final Four and the Elite Eight, and those guys are all done by the first weekend.
No, I understand your argument completely, but I think here's the lesson, Adam. And committee memberships will change over the years, and maybe philosophies will too. And heck, we may not even have a committee in a couple of years. We may go back to the BCS computer formula.
Greg Sankey is just going to announce the field.
Yeah, there you go. And the lesson to me is, if you are in a power league and you are either undefeated or have lost once, you are fine. Where it's going to get dicey is those 2 and 3 loss teams.
Yeah, until the SEC and the Big Ten rig the system where they have 4 automatic bids.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I mean that's good. They're going to try it. They're going to try it.
They are. They're 100% going to try.
Yeah, and they can do what they want because they have all the money, which again doesn't really compute with me. But the ACC and the Big 12 have already accepted less value for their participation per school than the SEC and the Big 10, which I don't even get. I don't even understand how you agree to that. It just shows you that for all Brett Yormark's bluster, he and Jim Phillips are the same, and they have no leverage, so they have to take the scraps that are offered by the SEC, which I think is a behemoth when it comes to certainly football, and the Big Ten, who just happens to have a lot of money. It's like the people who inherit money versus the people who earn money. You just got it because you have these massive schools. I'm editorializing way too much here. David Teel, let me ask you your thoughts on what we have seen in basketball.
Oh, my God.
2-14 against the SEC. Not good. Are you an alarmist to the point where you think this is a growing trend? And it might be a trend just from the ACC's perspective, not necessarily versus the SEC. But where do you stand on 2-14?
Well, Adam, it's not just 2-14. It's 3-26. They were 1-12 against the SEC prior to the challenge.
That's right.
They are 3-26. How is that even possible?
Yeah. Do you have a theory? Do you have a theory what has happened to, for the most part, ACC basketball?
I think part of it is coaching. I think the SEC has better coaches. I really do. And I think part of it probably is money. The SEC has more money to offer to more players.
Right.
Now last year the challenge was 7-7.
Right. Well, why wouldn't the Big Ten, who also has more money, why wouldn't the Big Ten be better?
Well, the Big Ten they always get far more teams. Well, I say always, in the last 3 or 4 years in the athlete compensation era, they have gotten more teams in the tournament. They just don't perform in the tournament.
Right.
Michigan State in 2000, what year was it? 2001 is the Big Ten's last national championship.
2000. Yeah, the 2000 Michigan State Spartans. That's your national champion.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. They get to a lot of Final Fours, and Michigan's been to some Final Fours. But for the most part, the Big Ten has not done very well in the tournament. Purdue obviously knocked on the door last year. But yeah, I understand the money. I think the money until the House settlement comes through has really been coming from NIL as opposed to the university. So I honestly think that I agree with you in terms of coaching. I think the ACC has hired poorly. Among the transition from Jim Boeheim to whatever's next at Syracuse is not going well. The transition from Rick Pitino to whatever's next at Louisville has not gone well. We're now on the third coach since Rick Pitino left. So the basketball school's got to be better. We need Steve Forbes at Wake Forest to win. We need Georgia Tech to be better. We need so. Like the basketball schools have to start holding up their end of the bargain. Much like in football, I've complained, like we need you, Virginia Tech. We need you, Miami. We need you, to an extent, Georgia Tech, to come back and be real. Because you're the football brands of the league. And Louisville, we need you to be good at football. Because when I use the example, when Duke and Carolina are not vintage at basketball, it's easy to go, well, Duke and Carolina aren't that good. The league must not be that good. I think Duke could win a national championship this year. I don't think there's another candidate in the ACC. And let me ask you, since we're talking about basketball coaching, Rob Sanchez is the new coach at Virginia, at least right now, after Tony Bennett's retirement. What are your thoughts on, is it going to be him going forward? Is it going to be somebody else? And who might that somebody else be?
Adam, if the season continues on this path, it will not be Ron Sanchez.
Yeah.
I mean, they've played 3 ranked teams, and they've lost those 3 games by a combined 65 points.
Yeah, they're not non-competitive in those games, yeah.
Yes. That's no way for an interim
right.
to have the label removed. So, who would next man up be? I think a name that it doesn't mean it would be him for sure, but I think a name that everyone in Virginia would fixate on is Ryan Odom.
Yeah. Ryan Odom from UMBC fame.
Well, yes, UMBC fame, and yes, from right down the street,
right,
at VCU, but Ryan Odom, who grew up in Charlottesville,
right,
and who after school every day rode his bike to University Hall to watch the Cavaliers practice because his daddy was an assistant coach to Terry Holland.
right.
So you talk about someone who appreciates the history of the program and who has cut his own path in the coaching profession quite impressively. I think he would certainly be among the candidates.
Yeah, no question about it. I know I've seen some people say Shaka Smart. I think he has now officially been rumored for every job in the Atlantic Coast Conference.